They say laughter heals, but what if it's the only thing keeping you from falling apart? I didn't believe it at first. How could something as simple as laughing fix a life that had been crushed, shattered into pieces so small that I didn't even know who I was anymore? Yet here I am, telling you the truth that still feels impossible to me. I rebuilt everything I lost with something so fragile, something so small, that most people wouldn't even notice it until it's gone. But before you think this is some uplifting story about finding joy, I need you to understand. Laughter saved me only after it nearly destroyed me. I still remember the exact night when I thought my life had ended. Not the kind of ending you see in movies with slow fades and soft music, but the kind that leaves you staring at the ceiling at 3 in the morning, wondering how you'll even survive tomorrow. My marriage had collapsed, my job had slipped out of my hands like sand, and the walls of my apartment felt more like a prison than a home. The silence was unbearable, so heavy it pressed into my chest until I couldn't breathe right. And yet, in that silence, I heard it, the strangest, most misplaced sound in the world. Laughter. Not mine. Not anyone else's. Just a memory of it, playing inside my head like an echo I couldn't shut off. Came from years ago when everything was different. When I was different. I thought of how I used to laugh until my stomach hurt, until tears blurred my vision, until people turned to stare because the joy was too loud to be ignored. I thought of how long it had been since I had let myself sound like that. Somewhere along the way, life stripped it from me. Arguments turned my voice sharp. Loneliness made me quiet. Fear made me silent. And yet, even in that moment, as broken as I was, that memory of laughter didn't feel cruel. It felt like it was daring me, asking me if I still believed it was possible to live again. But here's the thing, laughter is tricky. It's not always innocent. It can cut as easily as it can heal. It can echo in places it doesn't belong. It can pull you back to things you thought you buried. And the first time I truly laughed again, after months of being numb, I realized just how dangerous it could be. Because the sound didn't just remind me of who I used to be, it reminded me of everything I had lost. The first laugh came out of nowhere, and honestly, it scared me. I was sitting on the edge of my bed, scrolling mindlessly through videos on my phone, just trying to avoid my own thoughts. You know that kind of scrolling you're not even watching, you're just numbing yourself. And then one video, a clip of some stand-up comedian I'd never even heard of, slipped into the feed. He was talking about something so stupid, so ordinary, burning microwave popcorn, I think, but the way he said it, the timing, the exaggeration, it cracked something open in me. At first, it was just a smirk, the kind of thing you try to swallow back down. But then it grew. And before I knew it, I was laughing, really laughing for the first time in months. It came out ugly and broken, not smooth like it used to be, but jagged like something that had been locked up too long and was clawing its way out. Tears started rolling down my cheeks, and I couldn't tell if they were from laughing or crying. Maybe both. But as soon as the sound escaped me, I froze. Because the room, the silence, the heaviness, it all came crashing back, and I remembered. That sound didn't belong here anymore, not in this apartment, not in this life. It belonged to a version of me that no longer existed, a version who still had someone to share it with. And instead of feeling healed, I felt gutted. That laughter echoed in my chest like a ghost, reminding me of everything I had lost: my marriage, my stability, my identity. It wasn't just laughter. It was grief disguised as joy. For the next few days, I avoided it. I muted my phone. I avoided anything funny, anything that might trigger it again. I didn't want to feel it. I didn't want to be reminded. But life has a cruel way of forcing what you're running from right into your path. And it happened at the grocery store. I was standing in line, exhausted from pretending I was okay in public, when the man behind me dropped something, an entire carton of eggs. They exploded across the floor, yellow and white spreading everywhere, and instead of being angry, he just looked at me, shrugged, and said, "Guess that's breakfast ruined." It wasn't even that funny. But the way he said it, so calm, so resigned, it hit me. I started laughing again, and this time I couldn't stop. People stared. The cashier raised an eyebrow. The man just grinned like he'd done something heroic. And in that moment, surrounded by strangers, I realized something I hadn't dared to admit. Maybe laughter wasn't a ghost. Maybe it was a key. But the truth is, a key can open more than one door. And I was about to find out that the same laughter that saved me would also drag me back into the darkest corners of my past. The night after the grocery store incident, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the sound of my own laughter in my head like it wasn't mine, like it belonged to someone I used to know. I lay there staring at the ceiling, wondering if maybe I had stumbled onto something bigger than I realized. Maybe laughter wasn't just an accident, maybe it was trying to find its way back to me. But the problem was, I didn't trust it. I didn't trust myself. Because every time I let it in, it reminded me of her. Her laugh was the first thing I ever loved about her. Not her smile, not her eyes, though both were beautiful, but that laugh. It wasn't polite, it wasn't rehearsed. It was loud, contagious, the kind that filled a room and pulled everyone into it. When we first met, I made it my mission to hear it as often as I could. I'd crack jokes, do impressions, exaggerate stories, anything to draw that sound out of her. And every time she laughed, it felt like the world was just a little less heavy, a little more worth living in. But as the years passed, that laugh changed. It grew quieter, rarer, edged with something sharp. The arguments wore it down. The disappointments dulled it. Until one day it was gone altogether. I remember the last time I heard it. We were sitting at the kitchen table, bills scattered between us, silence thick in the air. I said something I don't even remember what, and she gave me a small laugh. But it wasn't real. It was hollow, a courtesy laugh, the kind you give to a stranger when you don't want to be rude. And in that moment, I knew. I knew I had lost her. So when I laugh now, even months after she walked out the door, I feel haunted. It's like I'm stealing something that doesn't belong to me anymore. Like the sound itself is borrowed, a relic of a life that ended. But still it keeps coming back. Little things, random moments, someone tripping on the sidewalk and recovering like a dancer, a child pointing at me and calling me giant man, in a grocery aisle, a stupid meme at 2 in the morning, it keeps breaking through. And yet, every time it does, it cuts me open. Because laughter doesn't just heal. It remembers. It brings back the good with the bad, the joy with the pain. And that's when I started to realize something terrifying. Maybe I wasn't rebuilding myself with laughter. Maybe I was tearing myself apart with it. The real breaking point came one night when I visited an old friend. He invited me over, said he was worried about me, and said I needed a night out. I almost didn't go, but something in me wanted to test it, wanted to see if I could handle being around joy again. His living room was full of people, music, light chatter, the kind of energy I hadn't felt in so long. And then someone told a story, something stupid about getting lost on the way to a wedding, and everyone burst out laughing. And so did I. For the first time, I didn't hold back. I laughed so hard my stomach hurt, so hard I had to wipe tears from my eyes. And in that moment, surrounded by people, it felt like life again. Felt like I was finally back. But then I saw her. Not really her, but a stranger across the room who had the same laugh, the same tilt of her head when she smiled. And in an instant the floor dropped out from under me. My chest tightened, my hands shook, and the laughter turned into something else and something darker. I excused myself, stumbled outside, and sat on the curb, gasping for air. My friend followed me, confused, asking if I was okay. But how could I explain it? How could I tell him that laughter, this thing that everyone else used so casually, had become a weapon in my life? A double-edged blade that cut me every time I held it? That night I made a decision. If laughter was going to follow me, if it was going to haunt me no matter what, then I had two choices: run from it or face it head-on. And I wasn't ready to run anymore. The morning after that panic attack on the curb, I woke up with a strange kind of determination. My head was heavy, my body felt weak, but inside me there was this quiet voice whispering, "You can't keep running." And maybe for the first time I actually listened. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee gone cold in my hands, and I made myself a promise: if laughter was going to haunt me, then I would chase it. I would drag it out of the shadows and force it to stand in the light with me, even if it broke me in the process. So I started small. Every night, instead of numbing myself with mindless scrolling, I put on stand-up comedy. At first it felt ridiculous. I'd sit there stone-faced, arms crossed, daring them to make me laugh. Some nights nothing broke through. But other nights unexpectedly I'd catch myself smirking, even chuckling. And each time I wrote it down. I kept a notebook by my side and tracked it: what made me laugh, how long it lasted, how it made me feel afterward. It was like training a muscle that had atrophied. Painful, slow, but real. Then I pushed further. I forced myself back into the world, places I had avoided for months, because I couldn't stand the thought of people seeing me broken. I went to comedy clubs, sat in the back where no one could see me. I listened to strangers laugh, let the sound wash over me, uncomfortable and heavy at first, but gradually, strangely soothing. I started to realize that laughter wasn't just personal, it was communal. A room full of strangers, all from different lives, all carrying different burdens, somehow sinking in one sound. It was like proof that maybe none of us were as alone as we thought. But here's where it gets complicated. The more I chased laughter, the more I realized how dangerous it really was. Because when you laugh, you lower your guard. Your body softens, your chest opens, your mind lets go. And that's when memories creep in. For me, it was always her. Her face. Her voice. That last hollow laugh across the kitchen table. Sometimes it came like a whisper, other times like a flood. I'd be laughing one second and sobbing the next, curled up in the dark with that old familiar ache. Still I didn't stop. I couldn't. Because buried underneath the pain, there was something else, something I hadn't felt in so long. Hope. Not the kind that fixes everything overnight, but the fragile, trembling kind that says, maybe tomorrow won't hurt as much as today. One night I pushed myself to the limit. I bought a ticket to a big-name comedian, someone I'd loved years ago but hadn't watched since the divorce. Sitting in that massive theater, surrounded by thousands of strangers, I felt exposed, like I didn't belong. But when the lights dimmed and the first joke landed, something inside me cracked wide open. I laughed harder than I had in years, uncontrolled, reckless, free. It was terrifying and beautiful all at once. For those 2 hours I wasn't broken. I wasn't grieving. I was alive. And yet, when I walked out into the night air, I knew this was only the beginning. Because laughter wasn't healing me, it was testing me. It was pulling me apart so I could see what was left underneath. And deep down, I sensed that the real battle hadn't even started yet. The night after the big comedy show, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. It was like laughter had pried open a door I had nailed shut long ago, and now the hinges creaked every time I breathed. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, and instead of the usual numbness, memories began slipping through, sharp, vivid, unforgiving. It started with the sound of her laugh, not the hollow one but the real one, the one I fell in love with. I could hear it so clearly it felt like she was in the room. I turned over, pressed my face into the pillow, tried to suffocate the sound, but it wouldn't stop. And then came the rest, the arguments, the slammed doors, the quiet nights when we didn't speak. Laughter dragged them all out, tangled together, impossible to separate. I thought chasing laughter would heal me, but what it really did was remind me that healing isn't a straight line. It's messy. Sometimes laughter felt like light pouring through a crack. Other times it felt like salt rubbed deep into a wound. The worst memory came a few weeks later. I was in the middle of a conversation with a coworker, one of those forced small talk moments in the break room. He told a dumb joke, something about his dog, and for some reason, it hit me just right. I burst out laughing. Real, loud, unrestrained. But the moment it left my mouth, I froze. Because it wasn't my laugh I heard. It was hers. The exact pitch, the exact rhythm. For a split second, it was like she had stepped inside me, like my body was just borrowing her sound. Panic surged through me. I excused myself, stumbled into the bathroom, and locked the door. My hands were shaking so bad I had to grip the sink just to stay upright. I stared at myself in the mirror and asked the question I'd been avoiding for months. Who am I without her? And that's when it hit me, the terrifying thought that maybe I wasn't laughing to heal. Maybe I was laughing to hold on to her. Every sound that came out of me felt like an echo, like I was keeping her alive through something that used to belong to both of us. The more I laughed, the more I remembered her. And the more I remembered her, the more I lost myself. That night, I didn't write anything in my laughter notebook. I shoved it into a drawer and slammed it shut. I couldn't look at it anymore. The pages weren't a record of healing, they were a graveyard of reminders. But here's the strange thing. Even when I tried to shut it out, laughter still found me. It crept in through cracks in conversations, through the hum of strangers, through my own restless mind. And I started to wonder, maybe I didn't get to choose. Maybe laughter wasn't something I could control or run from. Maybe it was something bigger, something that was going to keep chasing me until I faced the truth I had been running from all along. And that truth was coming sooner than I thought. It happened on a rainy Thursday evening, the kind of night where the world feels hushed, where every sound is muted by the rhythm of water hitting pavement. I had just left work, umbrella broken from the wind, and by the time I got home, I was soaked through, clothes clinging to me like a second skin. I collapsed onto the couch, exhausted, ready to sink back into the numbness I knew so well. But something stopped me. On the coffee table, half buried under unopened mail, was that notebook, the one I had shoved into the drawer weeks ago. For a long time, I just stared at it, debating whether I should burn it or throw it away. Instead, I opened it. Page after page, there it was, my laughter. Scribbled notes about moments that had cracked me open, moments that felt insignificant at the time but now carried a strange weight. Microwave popcorn joke. Eggs on the grocery floor. Comedy club, back row, strangers laugh. I read them over and over, and for the first time I didn't feel haunted. I felt connected. To the version of me that had dared to write them down. To the fragments of joy I had been too stubborn to admit existed. But then I turned to the last page, the one I had left blank the night I broke down in the bathroom. And something inside me shifted. That blank page wasn't a failure. It wasn't proof that I had fallen apart. It was an invitation. An unfinished sentence waiting for me to decide how the story ended. So I wrote. Not about laughter this time, but about her. About us. About how her laugh had carried me through more than I had realized. How losing it felt like losing oxygen. How maybe the reason I couldn't stop hearing it was because it wasn't just hers, it was ours. Something we built together, something that lived inside me whether I wanted it or not. And here's the truth that scared me most. Maybe that wasn't a curse. Maybe it was a gift. I sat there in silence after writing those words, the rain tapping against the windows like a metronome keeping time with my heartbeat. And then, out of nowhere, I laughed. Soft, shaky, but real. Not because of a joke, not because of a memory, but because of the absurdity of it all, that something as fragile as laughter could carry so much weight. That was the first time I realized laughter didn't belong to her. It didn't belong to the past. It belonged to me too. And if it had the power to haunt me, maybe it also had the power to save me. But just as I began to believe that, life decided to test me in the cruelest way possible. Because laughter, as much as it heals, also reveals. And the next time it found me, it brought with it a truth I wasn't sure I was ready to face. It happened at a family gathering I almost skipped. My sister had been begging me for weeks to come. Just for an hour, she said. You don't even have to stay long. I didn't want to go. The thought of being surrounded by people who knew me before, people who might look at me and wonder what had happened to the man I used to be, made my stomach twist. But guilt is a powerful motivator, so I went. The living room was loud, crowded with kids running around, cousins catching up, the smell of food thick in the air. I kept to the edges, nodding politely, sipping on a drink I barely tasted. For a while, I thought I could survive unnoticed. And then it happened. One of my nephews, 5 years old, fearless in the way only children can be, tripped over a toy car and fell flat on his face. There was a pause, the kind of silence that always comes before a child decides whether to cry or not. But instead of tears, he burst out laughing. Loud, uncontrollable, infectious. The sound filled the room, and one by one everyone joined in. My sister. My cousins. The kids. The whole house shook with laughter over a simple stumble. And then me. I didn't mean to. It just slipped out of me, sharp and sudden, and before I could stop it, I was laughing harder than I had in months. My stomach clenched, my eyes watered, and for a few moments I was weightless. Everyone else kept going, swept up in the joy, but for me something else broke open. Because that laugh, that raw and reckless sound, it didn't feel like mine. It felt like hers. Like she had stepped into me again, borrowed my lungs, borrowed my voice. And instead of joy, what I felt was grief crashing through me like a wave. I excused myself, rushed to the bathroom, and locked the door. My reflection stared back at me, pale and trembling, eyes red from laughter and tears all tangled together. And in that moment, I asked the question I had been avoiding for too long. Was I laughing to remember her, or was I laughing to forget her? The truth hit me hard. It was both. Every laugh was a bridge. One end anchored in the joy we shared, the other in the emptiness she left behind. And I was stuck walking it over and over, back and forth, never sure which side I belonged to. That night, when the gathering ended and I finally drove home, the silence in the car was unbearable. The echoes of that laughter, mine, hers, ours, clung to me like a shadow. And for the first time, I wondered if I would ever be free of it. But deep down, I also knew something else. If laughter could carry me into grief, maybe, just maybe, it could carry me back out again. I just had to be willing to follow it, no matter where it led. The next morning, I woke up with the echoes of that family gathering still clinging to me. My chest felt heavy, but not in the way it used to, not like suffocation, not like despair. It was different. It was as if the laughter from the night before had left a residue, something I couldn't shake even if I wanted to. I sat there in bed, staring at the wall, and I made a decision. If laughter was going to drag grief out of me, then maybe that was the point. Maybe I needed to let it. So I started testing myself. I leaned into it instead of running away. At work, when someone cracked a dumb joke, I let myself laugh without guilt. In line at the coffee shop, when the barista mixed up my order and handed me something so absurdly wrong it barely resembled coffee, I laughed. At night, instead of avoiding the comedy clips, I devoured hours of people making fools of themselves, stand-up routines, even old sitcoms I hadn't watched since I was a kid. Each time I laughed, grief came with it, yes, but I didn't fight it anymore. I let it. I let the memories flood in. I let the tears fall after the laughter. I stopped trying to separate the two. And something strange began to happen. The grief didn't crush me the way it used to. It was still there, sharp and relentless, but laughter softened its edges. It was like grief and laughter were two sides of the same coin, inseparable, bound together. Every time I laughed, I felt the ache of loss. But every time I grieved, I also felt a spark of life, a reminder that I was still here, still breathing, still capable of feeling it all. One night, I pushed myself even further. I went to another comedy club, but this time I didn't sit in the back. I sat right in the middle, surrounded by strangers. The comedian was sharp, ruthless, picking people out of the audience and roasting them. I prayed he wouldn't notice me, but of course he did. "You," he said, pointing at me with a smirk. "You look like the kind of guy who laughs at funerals." The crowd erupted, and before I could even stop myself, so did I. Loud. Art. Real. And for a split second I saw it her. Not the ghost that haunted me, not the hollow memory, but her in the way she used to be. Bright. Alive. Laughing with me, not at me. It was like she had stepped into the room just for a heartbeat. And instead of breaking me, it healed something I didn't know was still bleeding. When the show ended, I walked out into the night, the city buzzing around me, and I realized I wasn't afraid anymore. Not of laughter. Not of grief. Not remembering her. Because maybe the two weren't enemies at all. Maybe they were partners, holding hands, guiding me through the wreckage. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I wasn't fighting against life. I was moving with it. And though the path ahead was still uncertain, one thing was clear. Laughter wasn't my enemy. It was my compass. But compasses don't just point north. Sometimes they point you straight into the storms you've been avoiding. And mine was about to lead me there. It happened on a night I didn't plan for, a night that should have been ordinary. I was cleaning out old boxes, the kind you keep in closets just to avoid facing them. I told myself I was decluttering, but really I was stalling, buying time, pretending that moving forward meant throwing things away. That's when I found it. A shoebox tucked under layers of forgotten junk. Inside, photos, little notes, scraps of a life that once belonged to two people instead of one. And right there at the bottom was a recording. A tiny voice recorder I'd completely forgotten existed. My hand shook as I picked it up. I knew I shouldn't press play. I knew what it was, one of those nights we used to record each other being ridiculous, capturing our inside jokes, our silly arguments, our laughter. A whole archive of joy. A whole archive of pain. But I pressed it anyway. And suddenly there she was. Her laugh, alive and unfiltered, filled the room as if no time had passed. I heard my own voice too, younger, lighter, teasing her, chasing that sound out of her the way I always used to. For a moment, I was back there in our kitchen, glowing in the soft light, our mugs of tea going cold on the counter, the future still stretched out wide before us. And I broke. I laughed along with the recording because how could I not? It was so familiar, so alive, so contagious. But at the same time, I sobbed, my chest heaving, the sound torn out of me like it was both life and death in one breath. I clutched that little recorder like it was a lifeline, like if I held on tight enough, maybe she'd walk back through the door. That was the storm. Not the quiet kind, not the slow ache of memory. It was violent, tearing through me with every second of that recording. Laughter and grief crashed together until I couldn't tell them apart anymore. Until I wasn't sure if I was surviving it or being destroyed by it. When the recording finally ended, silence fell, heavy and merciless. I sat there on the floor surrounded by pieces of my past, my cheeks wet, my body shaking. But here's the strange thing. Beneath the wreckage there was something else. A stillness. A clarity. For the first time I understood. Laughter hadn't been haunting me. It hadn't been mocking me. It had been carrying me here to this exact moment, to force me to face the truth I had buried under silence. I loved her. I lost her. And both of those things will always be true. But so will this. I am still alive. And as long as I am, laughter belongs to me too. The morning after the storm, I woke up with swollen eyes and a raw throat, but also with something I hadn't felt in a long, long time: peace. It wasn't the kind of peace you read about in books, not the kind that feels like a clean slate or a fresh start. No, this peace was messy. It carried scars. It carried shadows. But it was real. I sat at the table with a cup of coffee, the same spot where I had once stared at the blank page in my laughter notebook. This time I opened the notebook and turned to a fresh page. And I wrote one word: today. Not yesterday. Not the past. Not her laugh, not my grief. Just today. Because that was enough. As the days went by, I stopped treating laughter like a ghost to chase or a weapon to fear. I let it be what it was, sometimes light, sometimes heavy, sometimes both at once. I laughed with coworkers. I laughed with strangers. I laughed alone in my apartment at something stupid on TV. And every time I felt that bridge again, the one that connected the past to the present. But instead of fighting it, I walked it willingly. Because maybe the point wasn't to burn the bridge or escape it. Maybe the point was to learn to balance on it, to carry both joy and grief in the same breath. And slowly I began to realize something else. Laughter wasn't just healing me, it was reshaping me. It was teaching me that life doesn't return to what it was before. It doesn't erase the loss, doesn't silence the echoes. But it gives you something new. A rhythm. A reminder that even in the aftermath of everything, there are still reasons to breathe, still reasons to feel, still reasons to laugh. One evening, months later, I walked through the city as the sun dipped low, painting the buildings in gold. People bustled around me, friends joking, couples smiling, children tugging at their parents' hands. And then, from somewhere nearby, I heard it, laughter. Not hers. Not mine. Just life itself, spilling out of strangers, filling the air. I stopped, closed my eyes, and for the first time I didn't feel haunted. I didn't feel broken. I just felt human. Alive. Part of something bigger. And I laughed too. Not because I was healed, not because the pain was gone, but because I had learned the truth. Laughter doesn't erase grief, it carries it. It doesn't erase love, it honors it. And it doesn't erase me, it reminds me that I am still here, still moving, still capable of joy, even in the shadow of loss. That night, I went home, picked up my notebook, and wrote another word beneath today. Tomorrow. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I believed in it. Please, if you enjoyed this story and you want to know when I drop more of it, please subscribe and turn on your notifications.